tired, but stuck. Those 3 words perfectly describe the paradox you're living right now. Picture this. It's 11 at night. You finally sit down. The day's over, or so you think. You check your phone one last time before bed, and there it is, another urgent email. Your brain, which should be shutting down, fires back up. Tomorrow you have to wake up early, but your mind is already on tomorrow. On the 9 o'clock meeting, on the presentation that's not ready, on the 3 projects you promised to deliver this week, you close your eyes but can't sleep. Not because you're not tired, you're exhausted. But your brain doesn't know how to stop. You've been in constant motion for so long that silence terrifies you. Rest makes you feel guilty. And then you think, tomorrow will be different. Tomorrow will be calmer. Tomorrow I'll have time. But tomorrow comes and it's exactly the same, or worse. And you've been like this for months, maybe years, running, always running, but never getting anywhere worth going. There's a word for this that nobody wants to say out loud: stagnation. But it's not the kind of stagnation you're imagining. It's not that you're not doing things. Quite the opposite. You do 1,000 things. Your calendar is exploding. Your to-do list never ends. You're busy every minute of the day. And yet, when you honestly ask yourself what you've accomplished in the last month that actually matters, the answer is an uncomfortable silence, because you've confused movement with progress. You've confused being busy with building something. You've confused constant activity with a life worth living. And that confusion is killing you. Slowly, silently, but without mercy. Seneca wrote something 2,000 years ago that perfectly describes what's happening to you. He said, "It's not that we have a short time to live. It's that we waste much of it." And then, as if he could see you right now, he added, "Life is long if you know how to use it, but you don't know how to use it. You've forgotten how. You've forgotten what's important and what's just noise. You've forgotten the difference between urgent and important. You've forgotten that being alive isn't the same as living, and the busier you are, the further you get from the life you said you wanted to build. Because here's the truth no one has told you clearly enough. Being busy is the most socially acceptable way to run, from yourself, from your decisions, from the questions you don't want to answer, from the life you're not living. When someone asks how you're doing, you answer, "Busy," and you say it with a tone that mixes complaint and pride, as if being on the verge of collapse were a badge of honor, as if your level of exhaustion measured your worth as a person, as if destroying your mental and physical health in the name of productivity was something worth celebrating. Marcus Aurelius knew this poison intimately. He ran the most powerful empire in the world. Every day, he made decisions that affected millions of lives, wars on multiple fronts, political betrayals, economic crises, a pandemic killing thousands of people daily. He had every reason in the universe to be busy all the time, to never stop, to never reflect, to simply react to the next crisis. And yet, every night, no matter how brutal the day had been, he sat alone, with a pen and parchment, and he wrote, not war reports, not administrative documents. He wrote about who he was, about who he wanted to be, about whether his actions that day reflected his values, about whether he was living or merely surviving. Those meditations weren't a luxury. They were his anchor, the only thing keeping the tsunami of external demands from sweeping him away from himself. And you need that anchor, desperately, because you're drowning, in meetings that go nowhere, in emails that don't matter, in projects you accepted just to look good, in tasks assigned to you simply because you were available, in a schedule that controls your life instead of serving your life. You've made being busy your identity, And when your identity depends on always being in motion, stopping feels like dying. So you keep running, even though you don't know where you're going, even though your legs can't take it anymore, even though your heart is screaming at you to stop, you keep going. Because stopping would mean facing something you've been avoiding for years, that maybe, just maybe, you've been running in the wrong direction. Epictetus was a slave when he learned the most liberating truth that exists. His leg was deliberately broken. His master did it out of cruelty, not by accident. He lived without physical freedom, without control over his time, without the power to say no to others' demands. And in the midst of that external prison, he discovered something revolutionary, that the only real prison is the one you build in your mind, that you can be physically chained and mentally free, or physically free and mentally enslaved, and that most people choose the second without realizing it. They choose to be slaves to their own schedules, to others' expectations, to a definition of success they never questioned whether it was actually theirs. You are one of those slaves. You don't have a master breaking your legs, but you've broken your own life. You don't have physical chains, but you carry mental chains heavier than any metal. The chain of should. I should work more. I should always be available. I should be able to handle everything. I should not need rest. Should. And every should is another nail in the coffin of the life you actually want to live. And the most devastating part is that you don't even know what life you want to live, because you've never stopped long enough to ask yourself, not really. Not beyond the superficial answers you learn to give. I want to be successful. But what does success mean to you? Not what your industry says, not what your family expects, not what Instagram shows. To you, in your heart. If nobody were watching, if money weren't a factor, if others' opinions didn't matter, what life would you want to wake up living every day? You don't know. Because you've been so busy chasing someone else's version of success that you forgot to define your own. Seneca worked as advisor to Emperor Nero, one of the most powerful and unpredictable men in history. He lived under constant threat. One day, Nero was happy with your advice. The next, he could order your death. And in the midst of that impossible volatility, Seneca wrote letters to his friend Lucilius. Letters about how to live well, about how to maintain your center when everything around you is chaos, about how not to lose yourself in the world's demands. And in one of those letters, he wrote something that should shake you to your bones. We are constantly complaining about how little time we have to live, when the real problem is that much of our life we don't live at all. Hear that again, slowly. Much of your life you're not living. You're spending it. You're wasting it. You're investing it in things that when you look back won't matter. In activities that keep you busy but don't make you present. In a productivity that's toxic because it's disconnected from any real purpose. You produce, yes, a lot. But what do you produce? Do you produce a life you love? Do you produce moments you'll remember? Do you produce relationships that nourish you? Do you produce a legacy you'll be proud of? Or do you just produce activity, noise, movement without direction, busyness without meaning? And here's the part that hurts most. You know. At some deep level, you know. That's why when you wake up at 3 in the morning and can't fall back asleep, there's a little voice asking, what am I doing with my life? That's why when you're in that pointless meeting, you feel a wave of emptiness. That's why when you check off 50 things from your list at the end of the day, you don't feel real satisfaction. Just a tiredness that goes beyond the physical, you know. But admitting it would mean having to change. And change is scary. So you drown out that voice. You bury it under more work, more busyness, more distraction, anything but listening to it. But that voice isn't going to shut up. No matter how much you work, no matter how busy you are, it's going to stay there, whispering, getting louder, until eventually it's not a whisper. It's a scream, it's a crisis, it's a collapse. It's your body telling you, I can't keep up this pace anymore. It's your most important relationship telling you, you're not present anymore. It's your own soul telling you, this isn't living, it's barely surviving. The Stoics understood something that modern culture has completely forgotten, that there's no separation between how you work and how you live, that you can't be frantic at work and peaceful at home, that you can't be disconnected from yourself for 16 hours and then magically reconnect, that how you do one thing is how you do everything. And if you've made stress, rush, and constant busyness your normal way of operating, that bleeds into every area of your life, into your relationships, into your health, into your peace of mind, into your ability to enjoy anything. It poisons everything. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The quality of your life is determined by the quality of your thoughts, and your thoughts are determined by how you live. If you live in constant reactive mode, responding to what's urgent instead of building what's important, your thoughts are chaotic. If you live without clear direction, just filling time, your thoughts are empty. If you live measuring your worth by your level of busyness, your thoughts are anxious. You can't think clearly when you're constantly running. You can't reflect when you never stop. You can't grow when you're trapped in a cycle of infinite reactivity. And that's precisely the cycle you're trapped in. You wake up already stressed. You check your phone before getting out of bed. The emails have already arrived. Notifications exploding. The day starts and you've already lost. You're already in reactive mode. You spend the day putting out fires, responding to what's urgent. No time for what's important. No space to think. No moment to breathe. Night comes. You're exhausted, but you can't disconnect because your brain is wired to always be on alert, always available, always producing. And then the insomnia, the headaches, the constant anxiety, the knot in your chest that never goes away. Those aren't random symptoms. They're your body and mind telling you, this pace is unsustainable, something has to change. But you don't change, because changing requires stopping, and stopping feels impossible. You have too many responsibilities, too many people depend on you, too much at stake. You can't afford to stop, or so you think, but the truth is different. It's not that you can't stop, it's that you're afraid of what you might discover if you stopped. Afraid that if you remove all the activity, all the distraction, all the noise, what's left is a void. A void you've been filling with busyness, so you don't have to name it, so you don't have to feel it, so you don't have to do anything about it. Epictetus said something brutal to his students. If you want to improve, you must be willing to look foolish and stupid. And in the context of toxic productivity, this means that if you want to reclaim your life, you're going to have to do things that look crazy from the outside. You're going to have to cancel meetings. Say no to projects. Protect your time like it's gold. Prioritize your health over your work. Choose being present over being busy. And people will question you. They'll say you lost your ambition, that you got lazy, that you don't have the hunger anymore, because we live in a culture that confuses being busy with being important, that confuses sacrificing your life with being dedicated, that confuses exhaustion with success. But the Stoics knew that's a lie, a dangerous lie. Seneca wrote, "It is not the man who has too little who is poor, but the one who craves more." And you're in poverty, not of resources, of time, of peace, of presence, of real life lived. You have a full calendar, but an empty existence. You have achievements on paper, but no real satisfaction. You have the appearance of success, but the reality of exhaustion. And you keep wanting more productivity, more efficiency, more optimization. As if the problem were that you're not doing enough, when the real problem is that you're doing too much of what doesn't matter and too little of what does. The lessons that follow won't give you tips on being more productive. I'm not going to teach you how to do more in less time. I'm not going to give you hacks to optimize your schedule, because that's not your problem. Your problem isn't that you need more productivity tools. It's that you need a completely different relationship with work, with time, with yourself. You need to unlearn everything modern culture taught you about what it means to be productive. You need to reconnect with truths the Stoics understood 2,000 years ago. Truths about what really matters, about how to live well, about how not to waste the limited gift that is your time on this planet. Marcus Aurelius, about to die, wrote his final words. They weren't about his military conquests. They weren't about his empire. They were these: do not act as if you were going to live 10,000 years. Death hangs over you. While you live, while it is in your power, be good. Be good, not productive. Not busy, not successful by others' standards. Good. And to be good, you have to live with intention. You have to consciously choose how you spend your time. You have to say no to what doesn't matter, so you can say yes to what does. You have to stop running long enough to remember where you wanted to go. Because if you don't know where you're going, it doesn't matter how fast you run, you'll still be lost, just exhausted. This episode is your opportunity, your moment to stop, to breathe, to look honestly at your life and ask yourself, is this what I want? Is this constant busyness taking me toward the life I want to live? Or is it taking me further and further away from it? And if the answer makes you uncomfortable, good. Because discomfort is the beginning of change. Complacency never transformed anyone. But discomfort, when you face it with honesty, can change everything. If you recognized your life in this introduction, if you felt that knot in your stomach from knowing you're busy but stuck, write in the comments, I'm busy but stuck, and today I choose to question it. Don't write it for me. Write it for yourself, as your line in the sand, as your commitment that this time you're not just going to consume content and stay the same. This time you're going to act. Write it now, because that small act of public commitment is the first step toward reclaiming your life. First Stoic lesson: you confuse movement with progress, and that's why you never advance. There's a scene Marcus Aurelius describes in his Meditations that haunts me. He was watching soldiers train, thousands of men moving, running, fighting, sweating. From a distance it looked impressive. It looked like progress. It looked like something important was happening. But when Marcus observed them more closely, he realized something devastating. Half of them were practicing wrong techniques, reinforcing bad habits, training their bodies for movements that in actual battle would get them killed. There was movement, lots of movement, but there was no progress, only the illusion of progress. And that illusion, Marcus wrote, is more dangerous than laziness, because the lazy person knows they're not advancing. But the one who confuses movement with progress believes they're doing their part, believes they're improving, when in reality they're perfecting their path to failure. You are that soldier. Not literally, but metaphorically you're training wrong techniques. You're in constant motion. Your calendar is full. Your to-do list never ends. From the outside you look productive. You look like you're building something. But when you honestly look at what you're building, the answer is uncomfortable. Because most of your activity isn't taking you where you really want to go. It's keeping you busy. It's giving you the illusion of progress. But it's not moving you toward the life you said you wanted to live. Epictetus had a question he asked every new student who came to his school. A simple but devastating question. Where are you going? And most couldn't answer clearly. They'd stammer, speak in generalities. I want to be successful. I want to have a good life. I want to be okay. But those aren't answers. Those are vagueness. And Epictetus would tell them something brutal. If you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there, and there is nowhere. Then he'd give them homework. They couldn't return to his class until they could describe with precision and honesty where they wanted to go. Not what others expected of them, not what looked good. Where they, in their hearts, wanted to go. And many never came back. Because that question, when you answer it honestly, forces you to recognize you've been running without direction, and recognizing that is painful. So let me ask you the same question, and don't give me the superficial answer. Don't tell me, I want to be successful, or I want to be at peace, or I want to be happy. Those are abstractions. Go deeper. If you could describe your ideal life 5 years from now with photographic precision, what would it look like? Where would you be? Who would you be with? What would you be doing? How would you feel? What kind of problems would you face? What kind of person would you be? Not the Instagram version, the honest version, the one that includes the uncomfortable parts, the one that admits your real priorities, the one that acknowledges what you're willing to sacrifice and what you're not. That description, do you have it clear? If you don't, then here's your fundamental problem. It's not that you're not productive enough, it's that you're being productive toward nothing in particular. You're optimizing your path to a destination you never clearly defined. You're running very fast without knowing if you're going in the right direction. And that's the perfect recipe for waking up one day successful by all external standards, completely miserable by your internal standards. Seneca worked with rich and powerful Romans who were living exactly that hell. Men who had everything, wealth, status, power, recognition, and they were empty. Why? Because they'd spent decades so busy climbing, they never asked if the mountain they were climbing was the right one. They assumed that if everyone else was climbing it, it must be the right one. They assumed that if culture celebrated that summit, it must be worth it. They assumed that if they worked hard enough, they'd arrive somewhere worth the sacrifice. And when they finally arrived, they discovered they'd climbed the wrong mountain, that the prize at the top wasn't what they wanted, that they'd sacrificed decades of their life chasing someone else's version of success. And then Seneca would make them do a brutal exercise. He'd ask them to imagine they would die within a year, just 1 year. What would change? What would they do differently? What would they stop doing? Who would they spend time with? What projects would they pursue? What conversations would they have? And the list they created was always radically different from how they were currently living. Because when time is limited, the trivial becomes obvious. The things that fill your calendar but don't fill your life become impossible to justify, and the things that really matter become urgent. But you don't need to be dying to live with that clarity. You just need the courage to admit your time is limited, that every day that passes is a day you never get back, and that if you're not using that day intentionally, you're wasting it. Marcus Aurelius practiced memento mori every day, remembering that you're going to die. Sounds morbid. But for the Stoics, it wasn't pessimism, it was clarity. It was the way to filter what's important from what's urgent. Because when you truly internalize your mortality, pointless meetings stop being acceptable. Projects that don't matter to you stop being defensible. Hours spent on activity that doesn't reflect your values become intolerable. Not because you become lazy, because you become intentional. Because you refuse to keep spending the most precious resource you have, your time, on things that don't honor who you are and who you want to be. So let's return to the fundamental question. Where are you going? And now the second part of that question. Is your current activity taking you there? Because you can have the clearest destination in the world, but if your daily activity isn't aligned with that destination, you're not going to arrive. It's simple math. If you want to build a business but spend 0 hours a week working on it, you're not going to have a business. If you want deep relationships but spend 0 quality time with the people you love, you're not going to have those relationships. If you want to be healthy but spend 0 time taking care of your body, you're not going to be healthy. Your actions reveal your real priorities, not your words, not your intentions, your actions. And if there's a gap between what you say you want and what your actions say you're building, guess which one wins? Your actions. Always, without exception. Epictetus was brutal about this with his students. He'd tell them, "Don't tell me what you value. Show me your calendar and I'll tell you what you value, because your calendar doesn't lie. Your calendar is the most honest truth about your priorities. You can say your family is the most important thing, but if your calendar shows 80 hours of work and 2 hours with your family, your calendar is saying your family is not the most important thing. It's 10th on the list. And that's fine. It's fine if work is really your number one priority, but then be honest about it. Don't say your family comes first while your actions scream it comes last. That dissonance is killing you. That gap between who you say you are and who your actions say you are is the source of your anxiety. Your guilt. That constant feeling that something is wrong. And here's the hardest part. Most of your current activity probably doesn't reflect your real values. It reflects what others expect of you, what your industry demands, what culture celebrates. What makes you look good, but not what you, in your heart, when nobody's watching, actually value. You've let external expectations dictate your calendar, and now your life is a series of obligations you accepted without questioning whether you really wanted to accept them. A series of commitments you made because they seemed right, not because they moved you closer to where you wanted to go. A series of activities that keep you busy but don't make you present in your own life. Seneca wrote a letter to Lucilius where he said something devastating. We waste our entire life preparing to live. And that's exactly what you're doing. You're so busy preparing to someday have the life you want that you're not living today. You say, when this project is done, then I'll rest. When I close this deal, then I'll take a vacation. When I reach this income level, then I'll spend time with my family. When. But that when never arrives. Because there's always another project, always another deal, always another level. You're postponing living in the name of preparing to live. And meanwhile, life is slipping away. Day after day, busy, exhausted, stuck, waiting for a tomorrow that never comes, while wasting all the todays you have. So here's your practical task, and it's simple but requires brutal honesty. You're going to take a sheet of paper. You're going to divide it into 2 columns. Column 1. Write down the 3 things that if you did consistently would completely transform your life. The 3 activities that actually move the needle, that actually bring you closer to your destination. Not 50 things. 3. The 3 most important ones. Write them down. Column 2. How many hours last week did you work on each of those 3 things? Be honest. Not how much time you thought about them. Not how much time you wanted to do them. How much time you actually, measurably, dedicated to each one. And brace yourself, because what you're about to discover is devastating. You'll probably find that the 3 most important things for your life received less than 10% of your time, and the other 90% went to activity that doesn't move you anywhere significant, to meetings that led nowhere, to emails that didn't matter, to tasks someone else could have done, to time spent because it was urgent, not because it was important. And that's the difference. Marcus Aurelius understood it perfectly. He distinguished between what's urgent and what's important. What's urgent is what screams loudest. What demands your attention now? What feels like a crisis? But most of what's urgent isn't important. It's just loud. What's important, in contrast, is rarely urgent. Your health doesn't scream urgency until it's too late. Your relationships don't scream urgency until they're broken. Your purpose doesn't scream urgency until you realize you've lived a life you didn't want to live. What's important is quiet, patient, waiting for you to have the courage and clarity to prioritize it over all the urgent noise. But you don't. You spend your day putting out fires, responding to what's urgent, and at the end of the day, you feel productive because you were busy. But when you ask yourself what you accomplished that actually matters, the answer is nothing, zero. Another day where you were in constant motion but didn't progress an inch toward where you actually want to go. Another day where you confused activity with achievement. Another day where urgency won over importance. And you've been like this for months, maybe years, and you wonder why you feel stuck when you're so busy. Epictetus had a perfect analogy for this. He said most people are like a ship with sails unfurled, being pushed by the wind in every direction, but without a clear course. There's lots of movement, lots of activity, lots of effort, but there's no progress, because progress requires direction, and direction requires clarity about your destination. And clarity about your destination requires stopping long enough to define it. But you don't stop. Because stopping feels like wasting time. When in reality, stopping to gain clarity is the only way not to waste time. Because without clarity, all your movement is fundamentally waste. It's activity without purpose. It's movement without progress. Here's the moment of introspection. Movement is not progress. Activity is not achievement. Being busy doesn't make you successful. If you don't know where you're going, running faster only takes you faster to nowhere. You need to stop. You need to gain clarity. You need to define your destination with brutal precision. And then you need the courage to align your calendar with that destination. To say no to everything that doesn't bring you closer, to protect your time for the three things that really matter, to be unpopular if necessary, to disappoint others if necessary, because the alternative is to keep disappointing yourself, to keep running without arriving, to keep being busy but stuck. And that's not a life. It's a slow way of dying while pretending you're living. Second Stoic lesson. Your packed schedule is a badge you wear to hide your inner emptiness. There's something Seneca noticed in Rome that haunts me, because I see exactly the same dynamic today. He watched wealthy Romans move from event to event, from banquet to banquet, from meeting to meeting. Always busy, always going somewhere, always with something to do. And when he stopped them, when he asked them why they lived like this, they didn't have a real answer. They just say, "That's how things are. Everyone lives like this. I can't stop. I have responsibilities." But Seneca saw something deeper. He saw that all that activity wasn't productivity, it was avoidance. Those people filled every moment of their day because they couldn't bear a moment of silence. Because in silence they'd have to face themselves, and that terrified them. And you're doing exactly the same thing, 2,000 years later, in a different world, but the same avoidance. You fill your calendar to the brim. You don't leave a single empty moment. Because empty moments make you uncomfortable. Because when there's nothing to do, when there's no distraction, you have to be with yourself. And being with yourself is exactly what you've been avoiding, because in the silence questions arise, questions you don't want to answer. Am I happy? Do I like who I am? Is this life I'm building the life I actually want, or is it just the one I think I should want? Those questions terrify you, because if you answer them honestly, you might have to change things, big things, your career, your relationship, your city, your social circle, your entire way of living. And change is scary, so it's easier not to ask. It's easier to keep yourself so busy that those questions don't have space to emerge. It's easier to fill every moment with activity, with noise, with distraction, anything but silence, anything but facing what's really going on inside you. Marcus Aurelius faced this temptation constantly. He was emperor. He had the best excuses in the world to never stop. An empire to run, wars to fight, crises to solve. He could have lived his entire life in reactive mode, busy every second, and nobody would have questioned him. Quite the opposite. They would have celebrated him as dedicated, as a tireless worker, as a committed leader. But Marcus knew something you've forgotten. He knew that a leader who never stops to reflect eventually loses their way. That the man who fills every moment to avoid being with himself eventually forgets who he is. That using busyness as an escape from your inner life is a guarantee of living an outer life that doesn't reflect who you really are. That's why Marcus wrote, every night, without fail. Not because he had free time, because he made time. Time to be alone, to think, to question, to ask himself if who he'd been that day was who he wanted to be, to face his fears, his doubts, his failures, to not run from himself. And those moments of forced solitude, those moments where he took off the emperor's armor and was just a man facing his humanity, those moments are what made him great. Not his busyness, his reflection. Not his constant activity, his willingness to stop and look inward. And you need to do the same, but you're afraid. Afraid of what you might find if you really look at yourself. Afraid that if you remove all the activity, all the noise, all the distraction, what's left is a void. A void you've felt for years but have been successfully ignoring by keeping busy. A void that whispers something is wrong, that something fundamental is out of place, that you've been building the wrong life, that you've been being the wrong person, that you've been running in the wrong direction. And as long as that void is just a whisper you can drown out with more work, it's fine, it's manageable. But if you stopped, if you really got quiet, that whisper would become a scream, and the scream would force you to act, to change, to face what you've been avoiding. Epictetus had students who came to him bragging about how busy they were, how many responsibilities they managed, how important they were. And he'd look at them with that look he had, that look that saw through all the bullshit, and ask them something simple. Can you sit alone, in silence, for an hour, doing absolutely nothing? And most couldn't. They'd get restless. They'd get anxious. They'd make up reasons why they needed to do something, anything, rather than be there, alone, with their thoughts. And Epictetus would tell them something devastating. Then you don't control your life. Your need for constant activity controls you. You're a slave to your own busyness, and a slave isn't free no matter how much apparent power they have. And that's you, a slave to your schedule, not free, enslaved by your need to always be doing something, always available, always productive, always in motion. You've made busyness your identity, and when your identity depends on being busy, silence feels like death. Free time feels like failure. Doing nothing feels like being nobody. so you fill every moment. And you call it productivity. You call it ambition. You call it responsibility. But deep down, if you're brutally honest, you know it's escape. It's avoidance. It's your way of not facing the void you haven't wanted to name. Seneca practiced something radical. Once a month, he withdrew completely from his work, from his family, from his responsibilities, from his normal life. He spent an entire day alone, not doing anything productive, not reading, not writing, just existing. He called it rehearsed death, because it was practicing being without everything we use to define ourselves. Without our roles, without our occupations, without our masks, just the core of who we are when we strip away everything else. And he said it was the most valuable practice he did, because in that forced silence, the truths he'd been avoiding emerged. The questions he'd been postponing became urgent. The void he'd been filling with activity became visible. And only by facing it could he fill it with something real, with something that mattered, with something that wasn't just distraction from his own life. You need your version of rehearsed death, not because you're morbid, because you need to see what's underneath all your busyness. You need to know if you're using being busy as a shield, as a way of not facing what's really happening, as a strategy for not having to change. And the only way to know is to create space, real silence, time where you're not producing, not responding, not doing, just being. And in that being, in that space without distraction, the truth emerges. Not the truth you want to hear, the real truth, the one that includes the uncomfortable parts, the one that admits where you've been lying, the one that recognizes what needs to change. And here's the part that's scariest. Once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. Once you name the void, you can't keep pretending it doesn't exist. Once you recognize you've been using busyness as an escape, you can't keep doing it with the same innocence. Knowing makes you responsible, and responsibility requires action, requires change, requires the courage to live differently. And that's exactly why you've been avoiding knowing. Because knowing would force you to act, and acting is scary. But the alternative is worse. The alternative is to keep running, keep filling every moment, keep avoiding being with yourself. And eventually, that strategy fails. Eventually, your body forces you to stop. Burnout, illness, collapse, or your life forces you to stop. Crisis, loss, the moment when you can no longer keep ignoring what you've been avoiding. And when that moment comes, when you finally stop, not because you chose to, but because you have no choice, the void is no longer a whisper, it's an abyss, and filling it requires much more work than if you'd faced it voluntarily when it was smaller. Marcus Aurelius wrote something you need to tattoo on your mind. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. And the strength you need isn't to do more. It's to do less. It's to say no. It's to protect your time. It's to create space. It's to be willing to look unproductive in others' eyes, because you know being present in your own life is more important than impressing strangers with your level of busyness. It's the strength to admit you've been using toxic productivity as a drug, and that, like all drugs, each time you need more to get the same effect. And that eventually, no matter how much you take, it stops working, and then you're left with the damage, without the relief, just the consequences. So here's your task, and it's going to be the hardest of all. In the next 72 hours, you're going to schedule 4 hours of total solitude, not guided meditation, not a podcast, not music, not work, Not screens, nothing, just you, in silence, for 4 hours. And you're going to let whatever needs to emerge. The questions, the emotions, the void, whatever it is, without trying to immediately fill it, without distracting yourself, without running, just staying there, facing it, naming it, feeling it, because that's the only path to filling it with something real, to building a life that doesn't require constant distraction, to being someone who can be with themselves without feeling miserable. And yes, it's going to be uncomfortable, extremely uncomfortable. Your brain is going to generate 1,000 reasons why this is a waste of time. It's going to create urgencies. It's going to make you feel guilty. It's going to try to convince you that you're selfish for taking 4 hours for yourself when there's so much to do, because your brain has been trained for years to avoid exactly this, to keep you busy, to keep you distracted, to keep you safe from having to face the truth of your life. And now you're asking it to lower its defenses. It's going to resist with everything it has. But do it anyway, because the alternative is to keep being a slave to your own busyness, to keep using your packed schedule as a badge when it's actually your cell, to keep filling the void with activity that never fills anything, to keep running from yourself until you can't anymore. And by then, the damage may be irreversible. The relationships you lost, the health you destroyed, the life you didn't live because you were too busy running from it. Here's the moment of introspection. Your packed schedule doesn't make you important, it makes you busy, and being busy doesn't fill the void. It just postpones it, just hides it, just makes it bigger. The only antidote to the void isn't more activity, it's more honesty, more silence, more courage to face yourself, because the void isn't the problem. It's a symptom. It's your inner life telling you something needs attention, and the more you ignore it, the louder it gets, until eventually you can't ignore it anymore. So stop running. Create space, face the silence, and discover what's on the other side of your need to always be busy, because on the other side isn't the abyss you fear. It's your real life waiting to be lived. Third Stoic lesson. Toxic productivity is running from yourself disguised as hard work. Epictetus had a student who arrived at his school bragging about everything he did. He worked from before dawn until after midnight. He ran 3 businesses simultaneously. He never turned down an opportunity. He was always busy, always moving. And when he finished listing all his activities with that tone of pride mixed with exhaustion, he expected Epictetus to congratulate him. He expected to hear, "You're admirable, you're dedicated, you're ambitious." But Epictetus looked at him with that penetrating gaze he had, that look that saw through every mask, and asked something completely different. "What are you running from?" The student went silent, because nobody had ever asked him that question. Nobody had questioned his constant busyness. On the contrary, everyone celebrated it. His family was proud. His friends admired him. His community saw him as an example. And here was this slave philosopher, this man who had lived without physical freedom, but had found mental freedom, asking him not why he worked so much, but what he was running from. And the student had no answer, because he had never asked himself that question. He had just assumed that being busy was good, that working hard was virtuous, that exhaustion was the badge of success. But Epictetus saw something deeper. He saw that all that activity wasn't productivity, it was avoidance. It was a way of not facing something, of not feeling something, of not answering questions that hurt too much. And you are that student, not physically in front of Epictetus, but metaphorically, you're doing exactly the same thing. You've turned work into your escape. Every email you answer is a way of not thinking. Every meeting you attend is a way of not feeling. Every project you accept is a way of not facing. And you call it dedication. You call it ambition. You call it work ethic. But deep down, if you stop long enough to be honest with yourself, you know it's something else. It's flight. It's avoidance. It's your way of keeping yourself so busy you don't have to face the questions that terrify you. Because there are questions waiting. Questions you've been postponing for months, maybe years. Am I truly happy? Not happy in theory. Not happy compared to others. Happy in my actual daily experience when I wake up and face another day identical to the one before. Do I like the person I'm becoming? When I look at myself honestly, without the filters I use for others, do I respect myself? Do I recognize myself? Is this life I'm building with so much effort really the life I want to live? Or is it just the one I think I should live? The one that looks good from outside? The one that impresses others but leaves me empty inside? The one that meets the expectations of my family, my industry, my social circle, but betrays something fundamental in me? Those questions are there, whispering, waiting. And every time they start getting too loud, every time they threaten to break the surface of your consciousness, what do? You dive into more work. You accept another project. You commit to another responsibility. You fill your calendar a little more. You check your email one more time. You respond to a message that could have waited. Anything but sitting with those questions. Anything but hearing the answers that might demand you change your life completely. Marcus Aurelius faced this temptation every day. He ran the most powerful empire in the world. Every day there were genuine crises requiring his immediate attention. Wars on multiple fronts. Political betrayals. Economic collapses. A pandemic killing thousands of people daily. He had the best excuses in the world to be busy 24 hours a day, to never stop, to never reflect, to simply react to the next emergency, and nobody would have questioned him. On the contrary, they would have celebrated him as a tireless emperor, as a dedicated leader who sacrificed everything for his empire, as someone who understood the weight of responsibility. But Marcus knew something you've forgotten. That a leader who never reflects loses their way. That a man who uses busyness to avoid facing himself eventually becomes a stranger to himself. That you can gain the whole world and lose your soul in the process. That you can rule an empire but not be able to rule yourself. And that's the greatest tragedy, having all external power but no internal power. All authority over others, but no authority over your own thoughts and emotions. That's why Marcus wrote, every night, no matter what, no matter how brutal the day had been, no matter how many decisions he'd made, no matter how exhausted he was, not military reports, not administrative documents, not official correspondence. He wrote about his inner life, about his fears, his doubts, his failures, about whether the decisions he made that day reflected his values or were just automatic reactions to pressure, about whether he was being who he wanted to be or who circumstances forced him to be, about whether his constant busyness was necessary or was a way of not facing parts of himself that made him uncomfortable. Those meditations weren't a hobby, they weren't a luxury, they were his anchor. The only thing keeping the tide of external demands from sweeping him completely away from himself. The only thing maintaining the connection between the emperor everyone saw and the man he knew he was. The only thing allowing him to remain human in the midst of the imperial machinery that constantly pressured him to be just a function, just a role, just a position. And you've lost that connection. You've been so busy being who others need you to be that you've forgotten who you really are. You've been so focused on meeting external expectations that you've lost contact with your internal desires. You've been running so fast you can't even remember where you originally wanted to go. You just know you have to keep running. Because stopping would mean facing how far you've strayed from yourself, how much you've sacrificed, how much you've lost along the way. How much of who you are now is just a collection of masks and roles and expectations with no real core. Seneca worked as advisor to Emperor Nero, one of the most unpredictable and dangerous tyrants in history. Every day he worked under the constant threat of death. One day Nero trusted him. The next he could order his execution on a whim. He lived in perpetual stress, in constant danger. In a situation where every word, every gesture, every decision could mean life or death. And it would have been so easy to use that stress as justification to never stop, to always be in alert mode, to fill every moment with work and preparation and strategy, to say, I can't afford to reflect, I'm fighting to survive. But Seneca didn't do that. On the contrary, he forced himself to pause, he made himself reflect, he disciplined himself to maintain contact with his inner life, even when his outer life was total chaos. And in one of his letters he wrote something that should shake you to your bones. We are constantly complaining about how little time we have to live, when the real problem is that much of our life we don't live at all. Read that again, slowly. Let it sink in. Much of your life you're not living. You're spending it on activity that keeps you distracted from living. You're physically present, but mentally absent. You're in the meeting, but thinking about the next email. You're at dinner with your family, but checking your phone. You're in bed, but your mind is still at the office. You're in conversation with someone, but already thinking about the next thing on your list. You've fragmented your existence into 1,000 pieces, and none of those pieces receives your full presence. None receives your real attention. None is truly lived. They're just moments you pass through running toward the next moment. And at the end of the day, the week, the year, when you try to remember what you actually lived, the answer is hazy. Because you were so busy, you were never really present anywhere. And you know it. At some deep level, you know it. That's why when you wake up at 3 in the morning and can't fall back asleep, there's a voice whispering, "What am I doing with my life?" That's why when you're in that pointless meeting, you feel a wave of emptiness in your chest. That's why when you check off 50 things from your list at the end of the day, you don't feel real satisfaction, just a tiredness that goes beyond the physical, an exhaustion no amount of sleep seems to cure. Your soul knows. It knows this isn't living. It knows you're using work as anesthesia. It knows you're running from something, and it's trying to tell you, but you're not listening, because listening would mean having to change. Epictetus was brutal about this kind of self-deception. He said, "You cannot escape yourself. You go wherever you go. You can change jobs. You can move cities. You can change partners. You can reorganize your life completely. But if you're using busyness as a way of not facing yourself, if you're using work as anesthesia to not feel what you need to feel, you'll carry that pattern with you. Because the problem isn't your circumstances. The problem is you, your relationship with yourself, your inability to be present in your own life. Your need for constant distraction to avoid facing what needs to be faced. And until you face that, you can run to the ends of the earth and you'll still be just as lost. So here's the question you have to answer with brutal honesty. What are you really running from? Not what stresses you about work. What are you running from in your life that makes you prefer working until you collapse rather than facing it? Is it your marriage that's dying? Is it the relationship with your parents you never healed? Is it the career you chose to please others but secretly hate? Is it the version of yourself you don't like when you look in the mirror? Here's the moment of introspection. Toxic productivity isn't hard work. It's escape disguised as hard work. You're using busyness as anesthesia, as a way of not feeling, as a strategy for not facing the questions and emotions waiting for your attention. And as long as you keep running, whatever you're avoiding is going to stay there, growing, waiting, until eventually you can't ignore it anymore. So stop running, create space. Face the uncomfortable, answer the hard questions, because the life on the other side of your fear is the only life worth living, and you can't get there while you're busy running from yourself. Fourth Stoic lesson: you measure your worth by hours worked instead of by real impact. There's a story about Seneca that changes everything once you understand it. One day, he was walking through Rome and saw two men. The first was a merchant who had been working since dawn, sweaty, exhausted, proud, bragging to anyone who would listen about how many hours he'd worked that day. 12 hours straight, no lunch, no break, pure hustle, pure dedication, pure sacrifice. The second was a philosopher who had spent the morning writing, just 3 hours of deep work. Afterward, he'd eaten with friends, he'd walked through the city, he'd conversed, he'd been present, he'd lived. And someone asked Seneca, who is more valuable, the merchant who worked 12 hours or the philosopher who worked 3? And Seneca answered something that should be burned into your mind. It depends. What did they create? Because value isn't measured in time invested. It's measured in impact generated. In real contribution. In whether what they did will matter tomorrow, next year, in a decade. The merchant had been busy for 12 hours. But at the end of the day, when Seneca asked what he had accomplished, the answer was hazy. He had moved things from one place to another. He had responded to demands. He had been in constant motion, but nothing he did that day would change anything fundamental. Nobody would remember it. No life would substantially improve because of it. It had just been movement, noise, busyness that felt productive but produced nothing of lasting value. The philosopher, in contrast, had written 3 pages. 3 pages that would change how someone thought about life, that would help someone live better, that would survive generations. 3 hours of concentrated, deep, meaningful work against 12 hours of scattered, reactive, forgettable activity, and Seneca didn't have to think twice about who had used their day better, about who had created more value, about who really understood what it means to be productive versus just being busy. And you've completely inverted that equation. You've made hours worked your measure of value. You brag not about what you accomplished, but about how much you worked. I worked until midnight. I haven't taken a day off in months. I'm handling 5 projects simultaneously. I slept 4 hours. And you say it with that tone mixing. Complaint and pride. As if destroying your health were a badge of honor. As if exhaustion were synonymous with importance. As if your worth as a person were directly related to how many hours you can work before collapsing. But the Stoics would tell you you're completely wrong. Not for working hard. Hard work is valuable. But for confusing the means with the end. For confusing effort with results. For confusing activity with achievement. Work isn't the objective. Work is the vehicle. The objective is to create value, to contribute, to build something that matters, to become someone you're proud of, to make your time on this planet mean something. And if you can achieve that in 20 hours a week of deep, focused work, you're infinitely more successful than someone who works 80 hours of scattered, shallow activity without creating anything significant. Marcus Aurelius ran an empire, but his measure of success was never how many hours he worked. It was whether his actions reflected his values, whether he treated people with justice, Whether he made decisions from wisdom rather than impulse or fear, whether at the end of the day he could look in the mirror and respect the man he saw, not how much he did, whether what he did mattered, whether it was useful, whether it contributed, whether he was faithful to who he'd decided to be. That was his metric, not ours. Impact, not activity. Integrity, not busyness. Real contribution that changed lives and built something that would outlast him. And when you start measuring that way, everything changes. Suddenly it becomes obvious that most of your current activity has no real value. That you're investing enormous amounts of time in things that fundamentally don't matter, in meetings that lead nowhere except to the next equally useless meeting, in emails that didn't need to be sent and nobody will read carefully anyway, in projects nobody will remember in a month, in tasks that keep you busy but don't make you useful, in activity that makes you feel productive because you're moving things but doesn't produce anything of real value for anyone. Epictetus had a devastating question he asked every student who arrived, bragging about how busy they were. Are you useful or just busy? And there's an enormous difference between those two things. You can be busy 16 hours a day and not be useful to anyone, not even yourself. You can fill your calendar to the brim and at the end of the year not be able to point to a single significant thing you accomplished. You can work to exhaustion, and when you look back, discover you built nothing worthwhile, because you were measuring with the wrong metric, counting hours instead of measuring impact, celebrating busyness instead of valuing contribution, confusing movement with progress. Think about your last week, honestly, not about how busy you were. I already know that. You were very busy. Your calendar was full. Your to-do list was endless. But that's not the question. The question is, what did you accomplish that really matters? What did you do that a year from now will still be relevant? What did you create that added real value to the world or to your life? What problem did you solve that was truly significant? What did you move forward that really needed moving? And if you're brutally honest, the answer is probably uncomfortable, because probably 80% or more of your time went to things nobody will remember a year from now. Things that felt urgent but weren't important. Things that kept you busy but didn't make you effective. Seneca explained it with brutal clarity. It's not that we have a short time to live. It's that we waste much of it on worthless things. And then he added something even more devastating. Life is long if you know how to use it. But we squander it in purposeless busyness, in directionless activity, in movement without destination. Your problem isn't lack of time. We all have the same time, 24 hours, 1,440 minutes. 86,400 seconds every day, without exception. The problem is that you're using your time, your energy, your life on low-impact activities, on things that make you feel productive without making you effective, on movement that isn't progress, on busyness that isn't contribution. And here's why this is so dangerous. When you measure your worth by hours worked instead of impact created, you create a perverse incentive. You incentivize yourself to work more hours, not to be more effective. You incentivize yourself to be busy, not to be useful. You incentivize yourself to appear productive, not to produce real results. And eventually, your life becomes theater, appearing to be doing a lot when in reality you're not accomplishing anything significant. Being in constant motion but not getting anywhere that matters. Impressing others with your level of busyness while inside, you know you're not building anything real. Marcus Aurelius had a practice you need to adopt urgently if you want to change this. Every night before sleeping, he asked himself, what did I do today that will matter in a year? Not what he did that will matter. And if the answer was nothing, he knew he'd wasted the day. It didn't matter how many hours he worked. It didn't matter how tired he was. It didn't matter how many things he checked off his list. If he did nothing that mattered, the day was a waste of life. And he committed to not wasting the next day the same way, because he understood something fundamental, that time is the only resource you never get back, that every day that passes is a day of your life gone forever, and spending it on activity that doesn't matter is the most tragic way to waste an existence. Here's the moment of introspection. Your worth isn't measured in hours worked. It's measured in impact created, in value generated, in whether what you do matters or just keeps you busy. You can work 80 hours and create zero value, or you can work 20 hours of deep, focused, meaningful work and change the world. The difference isn't effort, it's the direction of effort. It's intentionality. It's the courage to focus relentlessly on what matters and eliminate everything else. So, stop measuring hours, start measuring impact. Stop bragging about your exhaustion. Start focusing on your contribution, because life is too short to spend on valueless activity, and you've been spending too much time on exactly that. Fifth Stoic lesson. Being busy is the modern way of being a coward about hard decisions. Marcus Aurelius faced decisions that literally determined the fate of millions of people. Life or death decisions. Decisions about where to send armies, knowing thousands would die. Decisions about political alliances that would change the course of history. Decisions about betrayals that required executions. And yet, he found time to reflect, to write, to ask himself if he was making those decisions from his values or from fear, from wisdom or from pressure, from who he wanted to be or from who others expected him to be, because he understood something fundamental, that filling your time with frantic activity is often a way of avoiding making the hard decisions that would actually change your life. And you're doing exactly that. You fill your schedule to the brim, not because you really need to do all that, not because everything is equally important, not because you have no choice, but because as long as you're busy, as long as you're in constant motion, as long as you're reacting to what's urgent, you don't have to face the hard decisions you've been postponing. You don't have to decide if this career is really for you. You don't have to decide if this relationship has a future. You don't have to decide what's really a priority in your life. Because deciding means giving something up. And giving something up means accepting you can't have it all. And that terrifies your ego. Seneca had patients who came constantly complaining about not having time, about being overwhelmed, about having too much on their plate, about feeling like they were drowning in responsibilities. And he asked them a simple but devastating question. What if you only had 1 year to live? What would change in your calendar? And the list they made was always radical. They'd cancel half their projects. They'd reject opportunities that before seemed unmissable. They'd say no to social commitments they only fulfilled out of obligation. They'd spend time with specific people. They'd work on specific things. They'd stop doing things that now filled their week. Suddenly they had total clarity about what really mattered and what was just noise. And Seneca would ask them something even more devastating. Then why don't you live that way now? Why do you wait until you're dying to finally have the courage to decide what deserves your life? Because it's easier to be busy than to decide. It's easier to say, I don't have time, than to admit, this isn't my priority. It's easier to fill your calendar with everything than to consciously choose what deserves to be there and what doesn't. Because choosing requires clarity, requires knowing what you want, requires having defined values, requires facing that some things you're doing don't reflect your real values. And most people have never stopped long enough to define their real values. They've just adopted the values others told them they should have, their family's values, their industry's values, their culture's values, their social circle's values, but not values they consciously chose after deep reflection. Epictetus taught something revolutionary that most people never understand, that freedom isn't being able to do what you want. Freedom is being able to say no to what you don't want. It's having the ability to refuse, to protect your time, to defend your energy, to choose your life instead of letting others choose it for you. And most people are slaves, not to external circumstances, to their inability to say no. They say yes to everything, accept any project, attend any meeting, respond to any demand, take any opportunity, not because they really want to, not because they really care, because they don't have the courage to say no. Because saying no means disappointing someone, means someone might think you're not dedicated, that you're not ambitious, that you're not willing to do what's necessary, that you're not a team player. And so you live a life built of yeses you never wanted to give, a life full of commitments you never wanted to make, a schedule controlled by others' priorities, and you call it responsibility. You call it professionalism. You call it being committed. You call it having work ethic. But in reality, it's cowardice. It's not having the courage to defend your time, to protect your energy, to consciously decide what deserves your life and what doesn't. It's letting fear of others' judgment dictate how you spend your existence. Marcus Aurelius wrote something that should be burned into your mind. You can live well without doing everything others expect of you. Read that again. Slowly. You can live well. You can be successful. You can have peace. You can contribute. You can be respected without doing everything others expect of you, without meeting every expectation, without being available all the time, without saying yes to everything. In fact, you can only live well if you learn to say no strategically, if you learn to protect your time as if it were your life, because it is. Because here's the brutal mathematical truth nobody has told you clearly enough. If you say yes to everything, you're saying no to something. You're saying no to your free time, no to your health, no to your important relationships, no to your meaningful projects, no to your peace of mind, no to your ability to do deep work. Every yes to something trivial is an automatic no to something important. And the more yeses you give without thinking, without consciously choosing, the more automatic no's you're giving to the things that really matter. You're spending your life on others' urgent, while your important goes unattended. Seneca explained it this way: the man who doesn't know how to say no is a slave to every demand. And living that way is exhausting, not just physically, emotionally, spiritually, because you're constantly betraying yourself, constantly choosing what others want over what you need, constantly saying with your actions that others' priorities are more important than yours, that their time is more valuable than your time, that their agenda matters more than your life. And then comes the excuse. You hear it all the time. Maybe it's your excuse, but I have to do it. I need the money. I can't disappoint this person. This opportunity is too good to turn down. I can't afford to say no. And all those excuses have some truth to them. I'm not going to lie to you. There are situations where no has real consequences, but they're also convenient lies you tell yourself so you don't have to make the hard decision, so you don't have to face that you're choosing safety over authenticity, that you're choosing approval over integrity, that you're choosing comfort over really living. Epictetus had a brutal exercise for his students that you need to do. He'd tell them, make a list of everything you do, then ask yourself for each thing, Does this bring me closer to who I want to be? If the answer is no, stop doing it. And the students would protest. But I have obligations, I have responsibilities. And Epictetus would respond with something devastating. You chose those obligations, and you can choose different ones. But first you have to have the courage to admit they're choices, not inevitabilities. Because that's the most dangerous illusion, that you have no choice, that you have to do everything you're doing, that circumstances force you, that there's no alternative. But it's not true. Almost everything in your calendar is optional. You chose that job. You chose those commitments. You chose to answer that email. You chose to accept that project. You chose to say yes when you could have said no. And you can choose differently. But choosing differently requires courage. The courage to disappoint someone, to not meet an expectation, to seem less dedicated in others' eyes, to face the judgment, to live with the discomfort of having said no. So here's your task, and it's going to require more courage than anything else you've done. You're going to look at your calendar for next week, and you're going to identify 3 things you can cancel, not that you want to cancel, that you can cancel without catastrophic consequences. And you're going to cancel them. You're going to call. You're going to write. You're going to say, I won't be able to. And you're not going to give an elaborate explanation. You're not going to justify. You're just going to say no. And you're going to feel the discomfort of having prioritized your life over others' expectations. Here's the moment of introspection. Being busy is the modern way of being a coward about hard decisions. As long as you keep filling your schedule, as long as you keep saying yes to everything, you don't have to face what really matters. You don't have to choose. You don't have to give things up. You don't have to disappoint anyone. You can maintain the illusion that you can do everything, be everything, please everyone. But that strategy has a cost. The cost is your life. The life you never lived because you were too busy avoiding deciding how you wanted to live it. So stop hiding behind being busy. Have the courage to decide, to say no, to protect your time as if it were your life, because it is. And every day that passes without you making those decisions is a day of your life gone forever. 6th Stoic lesson. Your need to always be doing something reveals that you don't trust your own worth. Seneca watched wealthy Romans with an almost scientific fascination. They had everything, wealth beyond any imaginable need, power that let them change destinies with a single word, recognition that made them famous throughout the empire. And yet, they couldn't sit still. They couldn't simply exist. They had to constantly prove their value, at banquets, at public events, in grand projects, in constant busyness, as if the moment they stopped, the moment they simply were without doing anything, they would suddenly stop mattering. Their worth would suddenly vanish. And Seneca wrote something devastating about this. The man who needs to constantly prove his worth is one who deep down doesn't believe he has it. And you're doing exactly that. Your need to always be busy isn't about productivity. It's about validation. It's about proving you matter, that you're valuable, that you deserve your place. Because at some deep level, you're afraid that if you stop, if you quit producing, if you simply exist without achieving anything visible, people will realize you're not as special as you pretend to be. That they'll discover that underneath all your busyness there's nothing substantial, that you're just noise without signal, activity without substance. Marcus Aurelius was literally the most powerful man in the world. He didn't need to prove anything to anyone. And yet, every night, he asked himself whether his actions reflected real virtue or were just theater to keep up appearances. He questioned whether his worth came from his position or from his character. He forced himself to distinguish between what he was as emperor and what he was as a man, because he understood something fundamental, that if your worth depends on your busyness, your position, your external achievements, then you don't have real worth. You only have a mask you have to maintain with constant effort, and that's the most exhausting prison there is. And that's your prison. You've built your identity around being busy, around being productive, around always doing something, and now you're trapped. Because if you stop, if you simply exist without producing, who are you? If you're not working on something, do you have value? If you don't have something to show at the end of the day, do you matter? Your brain tells you no. It tells you your worth is directly tied to your output, to how much you produce, to how busy you are, to how impressive your life looks from outside. Epictetus lived this from the opposite extreme. He was a slave. He literally had no value in the Roman social system. He was property. He could be sold, beaten, killed, according to his master's whim. He had no achievements to show, no impressive occupation, nothing that made him valuable by external standards. And in the midst of that brutal reality, he discovered something revolutionary, that his worth as a human being had nothing to do with what he did or didn't do, that his dignity was inherent, that his humanity required no external validation, that he could be valuable without constantly having to prove it. And that liberation is exactly what you need. But you're afraid to seek it, because seeking it would mean facing the possibility that everything you've built, all your constant busyness, all your frantic productivity, has been just an elaborate mechanism to avoid having to trust your intrinsic worth, to avoid having to believe you're enough without achievements, that you matter without producing, that you have dignity without having to prove it every second of every day. Seneca had patients who came to him exhausted, completely drained, and he'd ask them, "Why do you work so much?" And they'd answer, "To be successful, to be somebody, to matter." And Seneca would show them something devastating. You're already somebody. You already matter. The problem is, you don't believe it. So you try to compensate for that lack of belief with external achievements. But it will never be enough. Because the problem isn't that you don't achieve enough. It's that you don't believe your existence has value without achievements. And that's your trap. You've made achievements your source of worth. And since achievements are temporary, since what you achieved yesterday doesn't count today, you have to keep achieving, constantly, without stopping, without rest, because the moment you stop achieving is the moment your worth disappears, or so you believe. And that belief has you running on an infinite hamster wheel where you can never stop, because stopping means admitting that maybe your worth never depended on your busyness, that maybe you've been chasing external validation to fill an internal void that no achievement can fill. Marcus Aurelius wrote something you need to burn into your soul. Your worth doesn't increase with your busyness. Your dignity doesn't depend on your achievements. You're valuable because you exist. Period. Not because you produce, not because you impress, not because you achieve, because you exist as a conscious human being. And that's a truth modern culture has completely forgotten. We've made human worth conditional, something you have to earn, something you have to maintain, something you can lose if you don't produce enough. But the Stoics knew that's a lie, a dangerous lie that turns humans into production machines, into slaves of their own need for validation, into people who can never rest because resting feels like dying, like ceasing to exist, like losing worth. And so they fill every moment with activity, not because the activity is necessary, because silence, stillness, simply being without doing, terrifies them. It forces them to face whether they really believe they have worth without producing, and the answer scares them. Epictetus told his students something that sounds simple but is transformative. Practice existing without doing. Sit in silence, without working, without producing, without achieving, without doing anything you can show. And notice what arises. Notice the anxiety. Notice the need to do something productive. Notice the voice that says, "You're wasting time, you should be doing something useful." And instead of giving in to that voice, simply observe it, because that voice isn't truth. It's fear. It's your insecurity about your own worth disguised as productivity. And here's what you discover when you do that practice honestly: that you can exist without doing and still be valuable. That your dignity doesn't disappear when your busyness stops. That the people who truly value you don't value you for your productivity. They value you for who you are. And who you are exists independently of what you do. But discovering that requires the courage to stop. To exist without producing. To be without proving. And that terrifies you, because you've built your entire identity on doing, on achieving, on constant busyness. Seneca practiced what he called days of voluntary poverty. Once a month he lived as if he had nothing. No luxuries, no comforts, none of the things that made him important in others' eyes. And he did it not because he enjoyed the discomfort, because he needed to remind himself that his worth didn't come from his possessions, his position, or his achievements. That he was valuable even without all those things. That his humanity didn't depend on his status. And he said that exercise was the most important practice he did, because it freed him from the need to constantly maintain his external image. You need your version of that. You need days where you produce nothing, where you achieve nothing, where you simply exist. And instead of feeling guilty, instead of feeling useless, you practice believing that your existence has value regardless of your production, that you're enough without having to prove anything, that your dignity isn't at stake every time your calendar has an empty space. And yes, this goes against everything modern culture has taught you. We live in a culture that measures human worth by productivity, that celebrates busyness, that sees rest as weakness. That equates your value with your output. But that culture is sick. It's creating a generation of exhausted people who can't stop because stopping feels like dying, who can't exist without producing, who have forgotten they're human beings, not production machines. Marcus Aurelius, in the midst of running an empire, wrote, "The source of your worth is in your character, not your circumstances. In who you decide to be, not what you manage to achieve." And that distinction is everything, because character is built in silence, in moments when nobody is watching, in decisions nobody celebrates, in how you treat yourself when there are no achievements to show. And that's the real work. The work of believing you're valuable even when you're not being productive by external standards. So here's your practice, and it's going to require courage. You're going to schedule an entire day where you produce nothing. You don't work. You don't answer emails. You don't advance projects. You don't do anything you can put on a list of accomplishments. You just exist. You walk. You think. You feel. You're present, without an agenda, without an objective, without a goal. And when the anxiety arises, when your brain screams that you're wasting time, instead of giving in, you're going to ask yourself, do I really believe I'm only worth something when I produce? Or can I trust that my worth is inherent? And you're going to practice the second option. Even if you don't fully believe it yet, you're going to practice existing without doing. And in that practice, you'll begin to free yourself from the prison of needing to be constantly busy to feel valuable. Here's the moment of introspection. Your need to always be busy isn't about productivity. It's about insecurity. It's your way of avoiding facing whether you really believe you have worth without achievements. And as long as you keep running, as long as you keep filling every moment with activity, you'll never have to answer that question. But you won't be free either. Because real freedom isn't being able to do whatever you want. It's being able to be who you are without having to constantly prove it. And that freedom only comes when you have the courage to stop. To exist without producing. To trust that your worth doesn't disappear when your busyness stops. And that courage, even though it scares you, is exactly what you need to reclaim your life. Seventh Stoic lesson. You sacrifice what matters today for a future that never arrives. Epictetus had a student who always talked about the future. When I finish this project, then I'll rest. When I reach this income level, then I'll spend time with my family. When I achieve this goal, then I'll live. And Epictetus listened in silence. Until one day, he interrupted with a brutal question. What if you die before reaching that, then? The student was speechless, because he had never considered that possibility. He had been living as if the future were guaranteed. As if then would eventually arrive. As if he had infinite time to postpone living. And Epictetus told him something that changed him. You're betting your entire life on a future that may never come. And meanwhile, you're wasting the only moment you actually have, now, and you're making the same bet. You say, when I close this deal, then I'll take a vacation. When I finish this sprint, then I'll sleep better. When I get this position, then I'll have time for my health. When this busy season passes, then I'll be present with my family. When, always when, never now. Always a hypothetical future where you'll finally live. But that future never arrives. Because when you get there, there's another when, another goal, another objective, another reason to keep postponing. And so years pass, decades, entire lives, waiting for the perfect moment to finally live. A moment that never comes because perfect never exists. Marcus Aurelius faced this constantly. Every day there was another battle, another problem, another crisis. And it would have been so easy to say, when this war ends, then I'll practice philosophy. When the empire is stable, then I'll reflect. When there's peace, then I'll live according to my values. But Marcus knew something you've forgotten. He knew that peace never arrives on its own, that stability is always temporary, that if you wait for circumstances to be perfect before living the way you want to live, you'll die waiting. So he didn't wait. He wrote during military campaigns. He practiced virtue in the midst of chaos. He lived his values while facing constant crises, because he understood you can't postpone living for a more convenient future. You either live now or you don't live at all. Seneca said it without filter. It's not that we have a short time to live. It's that we waste much of it as if it were infinite. And then he added something even more devastating. Every day people applaud the gladiator who dies well, but nobody applauds the person who lives well. Yet living well requires as much courage as dying well, perhaps more. Because you have to choose to live well every day, not just once when you die. And living well isn't something you do when you finally have time. It's something you do now, with the circumstances you have, with the limitations you face, with the imperfect life you're living. But you don't do that. You postpone. You postpone resting. You postpone being present. You postpone taking care of your health. You postpone the important conversations. You postpone living. And you tell yourself a story. It's temporary. This is just for now. When this passes, then I'll change. But that's a lie. It's the most seductive lie your brain tells you, because this never passes. There's always another this. There's always another reason to postpone. There's always another busy season. There's always another goal to chase before finally allowing yourself to live. Psychologists call it the arrival fallacy. It's the belief that when you reach a certain goal, everything will be different. Everything will be better. You'll finally have time. You'll finally be at peace. You'll finally live. But study after study shows it doesn't work that way. That when you reach the goal, after a brief satisfaction, you return to the same level of stress, the same lack of time, the same feeling of busyness, because the problem isn't your circumstances. It's your relationship with your life. It's how you choose to live each day. And if you choose to postpone living until circumstances are perfect, you'll never live, because perfect never arrives. Epictetus was brutal about this with his students. He asked them, "If you knew you had exactly 1 year to live, how would you live differently?" And the list they made was always radical. They'd work less. They'd spend more time with people they love. They'd say things they've been holding back. They'd do things they've been postponing. They'd live with more intention, more presence, more authenticity. And then Epictetus would ask them something devastating. Why don't you live that way now? What guarantee do you have that you'll have more than a year? Why are you postponing living as if time were infinite? And that's your question too. Why are you postponing living? Not theorizing about living, not planning to live. Living, actually living, being present in your life, being connected with the people you love, being aligned with your values, doing the things that matter. Why are you postponing that for a hypothetical future? What are you waiting for? Permission? You don't need it. Better circumstances? They won't come. More time? You won't have it. The only moment you're guaranteed is now, and every day you postpone is a day of your life gone forever without having been truly lived. Marcus Aurelius practiced memento mori every day, remembering that you're going to die, not as something morbid, as a clarifier, as a way to filter what's important from what's urgent, as a way to remember that time is limited, that each day is a gift, that postponing living is wasting the gift. And he wrote something that should be burned into your mind. You could be fine right now. You don't need your circumstances to change. You don't need more resources. You don't need more time. You could be fine right now if you just stop telling yourself you'll be fine later. Read that again. You could be fine right now. Not when you finish the project. Not when you reach the next level. Now, with what you have, with the imperfect circumstances you face, with the life you're living, you could be fine. You could be present. You could actually live instead of just preparing to live. But choosing that requires letting go of the fantasy of the perfect future. Requires accepting that this moment, with all its imperfections, is the only real moment. Requires the courage to live now instead of keep waiting for then. Seneca had a practice you need to adopt. Every night before sleeping, he asked himself, if this had been my last day, would I be satisfied with how I lived it? And if the answer was no, he asked what he would have done differently, and he committed to doing it differently. Tomorrow, not later, tomorrow, because tomorrow could be his last day. And he didn't want to die with avoidable regrets. He didn't want to die having postponed living until there was no more time to live. So here's your task, and it's simple but brutal. You're going to write your obituary, not the obituary you'd have if you died 50 years from now after finally having lived. The obituary they'd have to write if you died tomorrow, with the life you've lived until now, with the decisions you've made, with how you've spent your time. What would they say? What would they remember? What would they regret you didn't do? What would they wish you had prioritized differently? And then you're going to write the obituary you want, the one that reflects who you really want to be, the obituary that when you read it, makes you feel you lived a life worth living, that you didn't waste your time on the trivial, that you were present, that you loved deeply, that you took risks, that you were authentic. Write that obituary without censorship, without realism, without limitations, just the truth of how in your heart you want to be remembered, the one that reflects who you really want to be and how you really want to have lived. And you're going to look at the gap between those two obituaries. That gap is your work. That's your purpose. Closing that gap, not in the future, now. Because you have no guarantee of a future, you only have now. And every day you postpone closing that gap is another day where the first obituary becomes more real and the second becomes more impossible. Here's the moment of introspection. The perfect future where you'll finally live doesn't exist. It's a fantasy your brain created to justify postponing your life. And as long as you keep waiting for it, as long as you keep sacrificing today for a then that never arrives, you're wasting the only real time you have. You could be fine right now. You could be living right now. Not perfectly, but really, with presence, with intention, with authenticity. So stop postponing. Stop waiting for the perfect moment. Stop sacrificing today for a tomorrow that may never come, and start living now with what you have, where you are. Because this moment is the only moment that actually exists. And when you understand that, when you truly internalize it, everything changes, because you're no longer preparing to live, you're living. 8th Stoic lesson. Being busy gives you permission to neglect your relationships without feeling guilty. Marcus Aurelius was emperor of Rome, the busiest man in the empire. Every day he had decisions affecting millions of lives, crises demanding immediate attention, responsibilities that never ended. And yet, when his wife Faustina died, he wrote something devastating in his meditations. I regret every moment I was physically present, but mentally absent. I regret every conversation where my mind was on the problems of the empire instead of with her. I regret using my busyness as an excuse not to be fully present with the person I loved most. Marcus Aurelius, with every excuse in the world to be busy, recognized that being busy wasn't a valid excuse to neglect what truly mattered. And you have the same excuses, but far less justified. I'm busy. I have a lot of work. It's peak season. When this passes, I'll have more time. And you use those excuses to not be present with the people you love, to cancel dinners, to arrive late, to be physically there but mentally at the office, to give distracted answers while looking at your phone, to say, later, when someone wants your attention. And you feel bad. You feel the guilt. But busyness gives you permission. It gives you a socially acceptable reason to neglect your relationships, because everyone understands being busy. Everyone accepts it. Nobody questions you when you say, "Sorry, I'm busy." But Seneca knew the truth. He wrote, "To say you're too busy for the people you love is to say they're not your priority, period." Because we always find time for what we truly prioritize. And that hurts because it's true. If your boss asks for an urgent meeting, you find time. If an important client calls, you respond immediately. If there's a crisis at work, you cancel everything else. But when your partner wants to talk, you're too tired. When your child wants to play, you're busy. When your friend invites you, you don't have time. It's not that you don't have time, it's that they're not your real priority. And using being busy as an excuse is just a way of not having to admit that. Epictetus was direct about this with his students. He asked them, "Who are you going to regret neglecting when you're on your deathbed? Your boss, your clients, your projects, or your family, your friends. The people who loved you and whom you loved, but never had time for. And the answer was always obvious. Nobody on their deathbed regrets not working more. Everyone regrets not being more present with the people they loved. But we live as if it were the opposite, as if work were the most important thing and relationships were what we do with leftover time, if there's any left. And relationships don't work with leftover time. You can't build deep connection with the scraps of your energy after giving the best to work. You can't maintain intimacy with your partner through 5-minute conversations between emails. You can't be a good parent with the fragmented time left after being busy all day. Relationships require presence, real attention, quality time where you're not multitasking, where you're not thinking about your to-do list, where you're completely there. And if you're not giving that, your relationships are dying, slowly, silently, but without mercy. Marcus Aurelius understood this. That's why, despite running an empire, he wrote letters to his children. He spent time with his wife. He had deep conversations with his philosopher friends. Not because he had free time, because he made time, because he decided those relationships were more important than another meeting, than another document, than another problem of the empire. He decided that being present with the people he loved wasn't a luxury. It was essential. It was what made everything else worth it. But you don't do that. You put relationships at the end of your list. After work, after projects, after everything urgent, and what's left for the most important people in your life are scraps. Fragmented time, partial attention, half presence, and you tell yourself it's temporary, that when this busy season ends you'll dedicate more time to them. But that season never ends. There's always another one, and meanwhile, your relationships deteriorate. Your partner feels alone, even though you're physically there. Your children grow up without really knowing you. Your friendships become superficial because there's never real time to go deeper. Seneca had patients who came complaining that their relationships weren't working, that their marriage was dead, that their children were distant, that they had no close friends. And he asked them, "How much quality time do you spend with these people each week?" And the answer was always shameful. Minutes. Sometimes fragmented hours where they were physically present but mentally absent. And Seneca told them something brutal. You have no right to complain that your relationships don't work if you don't invest real time in them. Relationships aren't like plastic plants that look good without care. They're like gardens that die without consistent attention. And your garden is dying. Your relationships are withering. Not because you don't love them, because you don't nurture them. Because being busy is your perfect excuse for not doing the hard work of being present, of having deep conversations, of resolving conflicts, of creating real connection. It's easier to be busy. It's more comfortable to hide behind work. It's safer to give superficial answers because you don't have time for more. But that strategy has a cost. The cost is you're going to wake up one day and realize you're surrounded by people, but completely alone, because you built a life full of activity, but empty of real connection. Epictetus practiced something radical. Every week he blocked sacred time for the people he loved. Not leftover time, priority time. Time he protected as if his life depended on it. Because he understood that relationships don't grow in the margins, they grow in the center. And if you don't put important people in the center of your calendar, you're saying with your actions that they're not important, no matter what you say with your words. So, here's your exercise, and it's going to reveal truths you probably don't want to see but need to see, truths about where your attention really is. About what you really prioritize when nobody's watching except yourself. You're going to make a list of the 5 most important people in your life. The 5 that if you lost them tomorrow, your life would never be the same. The 5 that when you look back on your life, the relationships with them will be what really mattered. Write them down. And then you're going to do something brutal. You're going to review your calendar from the last 4 weeks. And you're going to calculate how many hours of quality time you spent with each of those 5 people. Not time where you were in the same space, but you were on your phone. Real time. Complete presence. Deep conversation. Genuine connection. How many hours? Most people are horrified by the answer, because the most important people in their lives receive less time than their inbox, less attention than their meetings, less presence than their projects. And that's not accidental. It's a choice. A choice you make every day when you say yes to what's urgent and no to what's important. When you prioritize work over connection. When you use being busy as an excuse for not doing the real emotional work of maintaining deep relationships. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his final days something you should memorize. People will forget everything you achieved at work, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. And if you made them feel like your work was more important than them, that will be your legacy, not your professional achievements, not your productivity, your absence, your constant prioritization of work over them, your busyness that you used as a shield to not be present. That's what they'll remember. That's what they'll regret. And that's what you'll regret when it's too late to change it. Here's the moment of introspection. Being busy isn't a valid excuse to neglect your relationships. It's a convenient excuse, one everyone accepts, but it's not valid. Because you find time for what you really prioritize. And if your most important relationships are receiving only the scraps of your time and energy after giving the best to work, you're choosing to slowly destroy them, not with dramatic abandonment, with consistent neglect. And that neglect kills relationships just as surely as any betrayal. So stop using being busy as permission to not be present. Block real time for the people you love. Protect it as sacred and show up completely. Because at the end of your life, the only thing that will matter is the relationships you built, not the projects you completed. And if you sacrifice the first for the second, you will have wasted your life on what doesn't matter. 9th Stoic lesson. Your body is screaming at you to stop, but your ego insists on continuing. Marcus Aurelius wrote something in his final years that should shake you. Your body is not merely the vehicle for your mind, it's part of you. And when you destroy it in the name of productivity, you're destroying yourself. He knew this from experience. He spent years on military campaigns, sleeping little, eating poorly, exposed to the elements. And his body collected the debt. He died at 58, probably from an illness his weakened immune system couldn't fight. And in his final reflections, he acknowledged something devastating, that he had treated his body as a disposable tool, as something he could sacrifice for his goals. And that was one of his few real regrets. And you're doing exactly the same thing. Your body is sending you signals. The insomnia you've been carrying for months, the constant headaches, the tension in your back that never goes away, the knot in your chest that appears every morning, the fatigue that no amount of coffee can eliminate, the anxiety that wakes you at 3 in the morning. These aren't just random annoyances. They're your body screaming at you, "Stop, I can't keep up this pace. You're destroying me." But you ignore the signals. You take another pill. You drink another coffee. You say it's temporary. That you'll rest later. That when this is over, you'll take care of your health. And your body keeps collecting the debt. Epictetus had a unique relationship with his body. His leg had been deliberately broken. He lived with chronic pain his entire life. And yet he understood something you've forgotten, that your body is not your enemy. It's not an obstacle to your goals. It's an integral part of who you are. And when you systematically abuse it, when you ignore its basic needs, when you push it beyond its limits consistently, eventually it rebels. And when it rebels, everything else collapses. Because you can't think clearly without sleeping well. You can't make wise decisions when you're exhausted. You can't be present when your body is in constant survival mode. The neuroscience research is brutally clear about this. When you consistently sleep less than 7 hours, your prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for decision-making, self-control, and complex thinking functions at the level of someone legally intoxicated. Read that again. When you're chronically exhausted, your brain operates as if you were drunk. And yet, you make important decisions. You manage complex projects. You interact with people who matter, all with a brain functioning at 20% of its capacity. And you wonder why you're not more effective, why you make mistakes, why everything feels so hard. Seneca said it bluntly. An abused body is a weakened mind. And a weakened mind cannot live well, no matter how many achievements it accumulates. Because you can be incredibly productive by external standards while your health deteriorates. You can achieve all your professional goals while your body collapses, but eventually the bill comes due. And when it does, you can't negotiate. You can't buy your body more time. You can't convince it to hold on a little longer. It simply collapses. And then all those achievements, all that productivity, all that busyness that justified sacrificing your health becomes completely irrelevant. And here's what's most treacherous. Your ego lies to you. It tells you you're the exception, that you can handle less sleep, that you don't need exercise, that you can function on junk food and chronic stress, that the basic rules of human biology don't apply to you because you're special, because you're dedicated, because you have important goals. But you're not the exception. Nobody is. Your body operates under the same biological laws as everyone else. And when you violate those laws consistently, the consequences are inevitable. It doesn't matter how important your work is. It doesn't matter how big your goals are. Your body is going to collect the debt. Marcus Aurelius exercised even when exhausted, not because he enjoyed it, because he understood his ability to govern well depended on his physical health, that he couldn't be the leader he needed to be if his body was weak. That physical care wasn't vanity, it was responsibility, it was investment in his capacity to serve well. And he practiced what the Stoics called physical hygiene, sleeping enough, eating well, moving regularly, managing stress, not as a luxury, as the foundation of everything else. But you've inverted those priorities. You treat your health as optional, as something you'll do when you have time, as something less important than your next meeting. And meanwhile, your body deteriorates. Your sleep is a disaster. Your diet is whatever you can grab between tasks. Your exercise is non-existent. Your stress level is toxic. And you tell yourself it's temporary, that it's the price of success, that later you'll take care of your health. But that later never comes, and your body keeps deteriorating. Epictetus asked his students, if you had a horse of incalculable value, would you abuse it? Would you deprive it of sleep? Would you feed it garbage? Would you push it beyond its limits without rest? And everyone answered, of course not. I would care for that horse meticulously. And then Epictetus asked them something devastating. Why do you treat your body worse than you would treat a valuable horse? Your body is the only thing you really have. Without it, you can't do anything. You can't achieve anything. You can't be anything. It's infinitely more valuable than any horse. Why do you systematically abuse it? And you have no honest answer to that question. Because the truth is, you've made your external productivity more important than your internal well-being. You've decided that impressing others is more valuable than taking care of yourself. You've believed the cultural lie that sacrificing your health is noble, that destroying yourself for your goals is admirable, that exhaustion is a badge of honor. But it isn't. It's just destruction disguised as dedication. The Stoics had a concept called oikeiosis. It's the idea that you have a relationship with your own body, a responsibility toward it, that caring for it isn't selfishness, it's self-respect. It's recognizing that you're a complete system, not just a floating mind that can ignore the body's needs, and that when you ignore those needs, the whole system suffers. Your thinking becomes foggy, your emotions become dysregulated, your decisions deteriorate, your ability to be present disappears. You can't function well when your body is in constant crisis. Seneca practiced what he called mandatory health days. Once a week, no matter what, he prioritized his body above everything else. He slept as much as he needed. He ate well. He moved. He rested, not because he'd earned it, because his body needed it, because he understood that without health, everything else was impossible. And he said those days weren't wasted time. They were investment. Because after caring for his body, his mind worked better. His decisions were clearer. His energy was real, not artificial from coffee and adrenaline. His capacity for deep work multiplied. But you don't do that. You don't have health days. You have days of ignoring your body while pushing yourself beyond your limits, and you convince yourself you're being productive, that you're achieving more. But the science is clear. You're achieving less. Your exhausted brain works worse. Your creativity diminishes. Your ability to solve complex problems deteriorates. Your memory fails. Your patience runs out. You're working more hours but producing less value, and simultaneously you're destroying the only body you have. It's lose-lose. But your ego tells you it's fine, that you can handle it, that you're the exception. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his final days something that sums it all up. I cared for my empire, but I neglected the empire of my body, and that was my greatest mistake. Because if I lose one, the actual empire will eventually fall anyway, but losing the other meant losing the ability to enjoy anything. Don't wait until your deathbed to understand this. Don't wait for the health crisis. Don't wait for the collapse, because by then you'll have already paid a price you can't recover. So here's your non-negotiable practice, and it's not a suggestion, it's an ultimatum. In the next 24 hours, you're going to make 3 sacred commitments to your body. First, you're going to sleep 7 hours minimum every night. No exceptions, no negotiation. Your work can wait. Your emails can wait. Your productivity can wait. Your sleep cannot wait. Second, you're going to move for 30 minutes every day. Not elaborate exercise, walking, whatever, but intentional movement. Because your body was designed to move, not to sit for 16 hours. Third, you're going to eat real food at least twice a day. Not what you grab between tasks. Real food that nourishes your body. And yes, this is going to require reorganizing your calendar. It's going to require saying no to things. It's going to require admitting that your health is more important than impressing your boss. But the alternative is to keep destroying yourself until your body forces you to stop. And when it forces you, it will be much more costly, much more painful, much harder to recover from. Here's the moment of introspection. Your body isn't an obstacle to your goals. It's the foundation of everything you do. And when you systematically abuse it, when you ignore its signals, when you push it beyond its limits consistently, eventually it rebels. And when it collapses, all your goals, all your productivity, all your busyness become impossible. You can't build anything lasting on a body you're destroying. So stop treating it like a disposable tool. Start treating it like what it is, your home, the only one you'll ever have, and care for it with the respect it deserves. Because without it, you have nothing. 10th Stoic lesson. True productivity isn't measured by how much you do, but by how much what you do matters. Seneca had 2 students who were always competing. The first constantly bragged about his productivity. Today I had 8 meetings, answered 200 emails, worked on 3 projects simultaneously. The second rarely talked about what he did. He just did his work in silence. And one day, Seneca asked them both, "What did you build this month?" The first started listing activities, everything he did, all his hours worked, all his busyness. And Seneca interrupted him. "I didn't ask what you did, I asked what you built. What exists now that didn't exist a month ago? What did you change? What did you create of lasting value?" And the first student went silent. Because he had been so busy, he hadn't built anything real. He had just been in motion. The second student answered differently. "I wrote a philosophical treatise. I helped 3 people resolve fundamental problems in their lives. I deepened a friendship I had been neglecting." He didn't mention hours. He didn't mention activity. He only mentioned impact, things that mattered, things that would change something, things that would last. And Seneca nodded. That's real work. Everything else is just noise disguised as productivity. And you're the first student. You measure your worth by your activity, by how much you do, by how many hours you work, by how busy you are. But you never ask yourself the fundamental question, what did I build? What exists now that didn't exist before? What changed because I invested my time here? Because the uncomfortable truth is, you can be incredibly busy without building anything. You can fill your days with activity without creating any real value. You can work 80 hours a week and at the end of the year not be able to point to a single significant thing you built. Marcus Aurelius ran an empire, but his measure of success wasn't how much he did. It was whether what he did reflected his values, whether he built something that would last, whether he made a real difference in real lives. He wrote his meditations not because he had free time, because he decided that mattered more than another administrative task. That building a legacy of wisdom was more valuable than responding to the next urgent crisis. And 2,000 years later, his meditations are still changing lives. While all those urgent crises he could have attended to instead of writing have long been forgotten. That's the difference between being busy and being productive, between activity and building, between movement and real progress. The Stoics understood it perfectly. They distinguished between being active and being effective. Being active is easy. Just fill your time with tasks, with meetings, with emails, with constant activity. But being effective requires clarity, requires asking yourself, does what I'm doing build something that matters? Will what I'm investing my time in create lasting value? Does what keeps me busy actually move the needle on something significant? Epictetus was brutal with students who confused activity with achievement. He'd ask them, "Are you a busy gardener or an effective gardener?" And he'd explain, "The busy gardener is constantly in motion, trimming here, watering there, moving this, adjusting that, always doing something. But at the end of the season, his garden produces nothing, because all his activity wasn't directed at what's essential: planting, nurturing, harvesting. The effective gardener does fewer things, but the right things, and his garden flourishes, produces, creates real value. And you're the busy gardener, always in motion, always doing something. But when you honestly look at your garden, what has flourished? What have you actually cultivated? What fruit can you harvest? Or has it all been activity that feels productive but produces nothing lasting, nothing that matters a year from now, nothing that changes something fundamental, just busyness that keeps you too distracted to notice you're not building anything real? Seneca practiced what he called value-created review. Every week, he asked himself, what did I build this week that will still exist next year? Not what he did, what he built, what he created of lasting value, what he changed that can't be undone. And if the answer was nothing, he knew he'd wasted the week. It didn't matter how busy he was. It didn't matter how many hours he worked. If he didn't build anything that would last, the week was a loss. And he adjusted the next week to make sure he didn't repeat the same mistake. But you don't do that review. You don't ask what you built. You just count what you did. And you feel productive if the list is long, if you were busy, if your calendar was full. But busy isn't productive. Busy is just busy. And as long as you keep confusing the two, you'll keep wasting your life on activity that doesn't build anything that matters. Research on real productivity is clear. The most effective people don't work more hours. They work on the right things. They identify the few activities that actually move the needle. And they protect time for those activities as if their life depended on it. Because it does. Everything else they eliminate, delegate, or minimize. Not because they're lazy. Because they understand that true productivity isn't doing more things, it's doing the right things. Marcus Aurelius had a question he asked himself before committing to any task. Does this build something that will matter in a year? If the answer was no, he didn't do it. It didn't matter how urgent it seemed. It didn't matter who was asking. If it didn't build something lasting, it didn't deserve his time. Because his time was limited, like yours, like everyone's. And spending it on what doesn't matter is the most tragic way to waste a life. Marcus Aurelius distinguished between cosmetic work and essential work. Cosmetic work looks good. It fills your calendar. It makes you appear busy and important. But it doesn't build anything fundamental. Essential work rarely looks impressive from outside. It's often quiet, slow, deep, but it builds foundations that last decades. And the trap of toxic productivity is that it keeps you so busy with cosmetic work, you never have time for essential work. Think about your typical week. How much time do you spend on work that looks good versus work that builds well? How many meetings are so you're seen participating versus to make decisions that matter? How many emails are to maintain appearances versus to communicate something essential? How many projects are to impress versus to create lasting value? If you're honest, probably most of your time goes to cosmetic, to appearances, to activity that looks productive but doesn't produce anything that lasts. And that's the difference between being busy and building something meaningful, between filling your calendar and filling your life with work that matters, between impressing others with your level of activity and respecting yourself for the value you create. The Stoics chose the latter, always, without exception, because they understood that in the end, the only thing that remains is what you built, not how busy you were, not how many hours you worked, only what you built that changed something. That helped someone. That will outlast you. So here's your final exercise, and it's going to change how you see your productivity forever. You're going to make 2 lists. List 1, everything you did the last 4 weeks. Everything. Every meeting, every project, every task, everything. List 2, of all that, what you built that will still exist a year from now, what you created of lasting value, what you changed that can't be undone. Write only what truly qualifies, not what you hope will matter. What you know will matter. Most people are horrified by the second list, because it's much shorter than the first. Sometimes it's empty. All that work, all those hours, all that busyness, and nothing to show. Nothing that lasts, nothing that really matters. Just activity that filled time without building anything significant. And that's the brutal truth about toxic productivity. It keeps you so busy you never have time for what really matters, for building something lasting, for creating real value, for doing work that means something beyond next week. Epictetus told his students something that sums it all up. At the end of your life, nobody is going to ask how many meetings you had. They're going to ask what you built, what you created, what you changed, what you did that mattered. And if your answer is, "I was very busy," you will have wasted your life. Here's the moment of introspection. True productivity isn't measured by how much you do. It's measured by how much what you do matters, by how much you build that will last, by how much value you create that will change something fundamental. You can be busy your whole life without building anything, or you can focus on what's essential and build something that matters. The choice is yours, but choose now. Because every day you spend busy without building is a day of your life gone without creating anything real, and you can't get those days back. So stop measuring productivity by activity. Start measuring it by what you build, by impact, by lasting value, because that's the only metric that matters when you look back on your life. From toxic busyness to intentional living, you've reached the end. 10 lessons that probably made you uncomfortable, that questioned things you took for granted, that forced you to look at patterns you've been avoiding. And now you're at a decisive moment. You can close this and go back to your life exactly the same. Busy, exhausted, stuck, with the same excuses, the same justifications, the same promises that tomorrow will be different. Or you can decide that something changes, now, today, this moment. The Stoics didn't write to entertain, they wrote to transform. Marcus Aurelius didn't write his meditations so you'd read them and feel temporarily inspired. He wrote them as tools for real transformation, as brutal reminders of how to live when everything in you wants to give up, when you're tired, when you're scared, when the easy thing is to fall back into old patterns. He wrote them, knowing that knowledge without action is just entertainment, that philosophy without practice is intellectual masturbation, that understanding without implementing changes nothing. And you've understood. The 10 lessons resonated. You recognized your patterns. You saw your traps. You identified your toxic busyness. But understanding isn't enough. It never is. Because you can perfectly understand why you're trapped and stay trapped. You can see your destructive patterns with crystal clarity and repeat them tomorrow. You can know exactly what you need to change and change nothing, because knowledge without action is just another form of procrastination disguised as progress. Seneca had students who came to his classes for years, who could quote all of Stoic philosophy, who understood every concept, who spoke eloquently about virtue and wisdom, and they lived miserable lives. Why? Because they knew but didn't practice. They understood but didn't implement. They knew but didn't do. And Seneca told them something devastating. You've spent years studying how to live well. When are you going to start living well? Because studying without practicing isn't philosophy. It's cowardice disguised as education. So here you are, with 10 lessons, with 10 truths, with 10 tools that can change your life, but only if you use them, only if you implement them, only if you decide that this time is different. That this time you're not just going to consume inspiring content and stay the same. That this time you're going to act, and the action has to start in the next 24 hours. not tomorrow in the abstract, in the next concrete 24 hours. Because if you don't act in the next 24 hours, you probably never will. Because tomorrow you'll have the same excuses, the same reasons to postpone, the same justifications to stay as you are. Epictetus had a final exercise for his students when they finished their training. He'd ask them, "What are you going to do differently tomorrow?" Not what you understood, not what you learned. What you're going to do differently. Because the difference between philosophy and talk therapy is action. And most couldn't answer, because they hadn't translated knowledge into concrete actions. So Epictetus would send them back. When you can tell me 3 specific things you'll do differently tomorrow, come back. Until then, you're not ready, because you haven't understood that philosophy without action is just pretty words. So here's your closing exercise. And it's not optional, it's the price of admission to real transformation. You're going to choose 3 lessons from the 10 that resonated most with you, the 3 you most need to implement. And for each one, you're going to write a specific action you'll take in the next 24 hours. Not, "I'm going to be more intentional." That's not specific. "I'm going to cancel 2 meetings tomorrow that don't build anything and use that time for deep work on my most important project." That's specific. Not, "I'm going to take better care of my health. I'm going to be in bed by 10 tonight without exception and sleep 7 hours." That's specific. 3 lessons, 3 actions, 24 hours. Write them now, before moving on, before your brain convinces you you'll do it later, because later never comes. There's only now. And if you don't act now, while the discomfort of these truths is still fresh, while the motivation is still present, you won't act ever. Marcus Aurelius practiced what he called philosophy in action. Every truth he learned, he immediately looked for how to implement it that day. He didn't save it for later. He didn't add it to his list of things to eventually do. He implemented it, imperfectly, with fear, with doubt. But he implemented it, because he understood that the moment between learning and acting is where all transformations die. That if you don't act immediately, the window closes, inertia returns, old patterns win, and everything learned evaporates into air. And here's something you need to understand viscerally. This moment, this exact moment as you process these words, is the most important moment of this entire episode. Not the beginning, not the middle. This moment. Because this is the moment where you decide if everything before was entertainment or transformation, if it was information or action, if it was content you consumed or tools you'll implement. The Stoics believed we all have moments of awakening, moments where we see the truth with brutal clarity, where excuses stop working, where destructive patterns become impossible to ignore. This can be that moment for you. But only if you choose to make it so. Only if you decide that bone-deep exhaustion is worth less than the intentional life you could be living. And yes, it's going to be hard. Change is always hard. Breaking patterns takes effort. Saying no takes courage. Prioritizing differently takes conviction. But you know what's harder? Continuing to live a life you don't want to live. Continuing to sacrifice your health, your relationships, your peace, your life, at the altar of a productivity that makes you neither more successful nor happier. Continuing tired but stuck. Continuing busy but empty. That's harder, much harder, because that hardship never ends, never gets better. It only accumulates, only gets heavier, until one day you can't take it anymore. Seneca wrote on his deathbed something that sums it all up. "I lived well, not because I achieved much, but because I lived intentionally. Because I consciously chose how to spend each day. Because I didn't let busyness dictate my life. Because I had the courage to say no to what didn't matter so I could say yes to what did. And that courage, though it cost me opportunities, though it disappointed others, though it looked less impressive from outside, is what gives me peace now that life is ending. That's your invitation. Not to achieve more, to live better, not to be busier, to be more intentional, not to impress more people, to be at peace with yourself. And that invitation expires. Not in a year, not in a month, in the next 24 hours. Because if you don't act in the next 24 hours, this episode will join the long list of inspiring content you consumed that didn't change anything, and you'll stay exactly where you are. Tired but stuck, busy but empty, productive in appearance but miserable in essence. So decide, now, what are you going to do differently in the next 24 hours? Not what you're going to think differently, what you're going to do differently. Write it down. Commit to it and do it, because that's the only path to real transformation. Not knowledge, action, not inspiration, implementation, not tomorrow, now. And if you've decided to subscribe, if you've decided these weekly reminders can keep you on track, do it now, not because I need subscribers, because you need constant reminders, because you're going to forget, you're going to fall back into old patterns, you're going to find new excuses. And you need voices reminding you that time is limited, that being busy isn't living, that you have a choice. Subscribe not as a favor to me, as a commitment to yourself. But more important than subscribing is what you do in the next 24 hours. Because you can subscribe to 1,000 channels and still change nothing. What matters is action. And that action has to start now. 3 lessons, 3 actions, 24 hours. That's all you need to begin. To prove something changed. To break the pattern of consuming without implementing. Here's your final moment of introspection. Being busy but stuck isn't destiny. It's a choice. A choice you make every day when you say yes to what's urgent and no to what's important. When you prioritize impressing over living. When you measure worth by activity instead of impact. But you can choose differently. Today, now, in the next 24 hours. 3 actions that prove you understood, that something changed, that this time is different. Because if you don't act now, you won't act ever, and you'll stay exactly where you are. But if you act, if you implement, if you decide your life is worth more than your busyness, everything can change. Not tomorrow, now. The moment is here. The choice is yours. And time is running out. What are you going to do? Your voice matters here more than you think. Every insight you share strengthens and elevates this community, because this isn't just another space. It's a circle of people who choose to live with intention, with discipline, and with character. Each of you leaves a mark, and the reflection that receives the most support will be pinned as a banner of who we are. Not as decoration, but as a reminder of the kind of warrior who chooses to think, feel, and act with stoic clarity. Because this is a community that doesn't run from pain, it walks through it with courage. A community that doesn't look for cheap comfort, it seeks wisdom. A community that doesn't break under adversity, it turns it into strength. And if you've made it this far, it's because something inside you is already shifting. Something is waking up. Something is asking for more. So, before you leave, check the description. There you'll find the paths we created to help you keep strengthening your mind. They're not there by accident. Each one exists to help you go deeper, build inner resilience, and return again and again to that place within you where nothing and no one can take your peace. Subscribing isn't doing the podcast a favor. It's an act of respect toward yourself. It's choosing not to live on autopilot anymore. It's committing to think differently, to feel with more order, to live with more intention. Because every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we publish reflections designed to stay with you when life gets heavy, when your mind gets loud, when you need a reminder of who you are. Not following us means risking missing the one lesson you might need in the hardest moment. And if you choose to go a step further, if you choose to become a member, understand one thing clearly. You're not donating, you're sustaining a mission. Because of you, this flame stays alive. Because of you, we can keep spreading Stoicism as a refuge for millions who are fighting not to give up. Your support is what keeps this podcast alive, strong, and growing. You're not a spectator, you're part of the foundation holding this community together. I'll see you in our next Stoicism for Winners session, where we'll keep exploring the depth of Stoic wisdom applied to everyday life. In the meantime, dive into the recommended sessions in the description and continue your path. And until we cross paths again, don't forget this. You are the master of your perception, the guardian of your peace, and the warrior of your own battle. That is the legacy of Stoicism. That is the art of becoming invincible.